Mariusz Kamiński and Maciej Wąsik spent more than 2 weeks in prison. According to the opposition, this was political repression and revenge for their fight against corruption, which is a hallmark of both politicians. The authorities did not recognise the 2015 presidential pardon, and on Monday, President Andrzej Duda completed the procedure that confirmed the earlier pardon. Both politicians are now free and unanimously announced that they will return to their work as deputies in Parliament. Marshal of the Sejm, Szymon Hołownia, has announced that he will not allow them to work as deputies because he does not recognise the first pardon and considers their mandates to have expired based on the court decision from December last year. According to the opposition, the leader of Poland 2050 follows the principle announced by Donald Tusk: "We will apply the law as we understand it." Strengthened forces were guarding the Sejm today. Is this in case MPs Kamiński and Wąsik show up? There is no official confirmation. What is certain is that they were not in the Parliament building today, which is what they announced on our radio. A few days to gain physical strength because we have absolutely no lack of mental and moral strength. So, Mr. Hołownia, Mr. Tusk, we will see each other soon on our terms, and we will look you straight in the eye. We are MPs and we will not give up. Law and Justice supports its MPs, which angers Prime Minister Tusk.
Macie zawsze czas.
You always have the time to raise criminals convicted by a final judgment to some new heights. Politicians of the 13th December coalition have a limited knowledge of the law and claim that Mariusz Kamiński and Maciej Wąsik are no longer MPs. Are MK and MW MPs? No. Why do you think so? Because they were legally sentenced to imprisonment. But the Supreme Court overturned the decision of Marshal Hołownia. But there was no cassation in this case. Only a cassation can change the final judgment in this case. Cassation does not apply here because it is a completely different procedure, a different issue regulated separately in the provisions of the Act. Are they MPs? Under the law they are not. Based on what law? Polish, if they are convicted by a final judgment. But the Supreme Court found otherwise and overturned the decision of the Marshal of the Sejm, Hołownia. Are you sure that this is what they are? The Supreme Court. Not the Supreme Court, but a chamber composed of judges who are not judges. This accusation must be strongly opposed because it does not apply either in principle or in the applicable law. And it must be added that the European Union has no authority to organise the judiciary in member states. The current government does not recognise the judgments of the Supreme Court or the judgments of the Constitutional Tribunal and undermines the President's right of pardon. Which provision of the Constitution indicates that presidential pardons have a time frame? I am not an expert on pardons because I have never been president. Time frame? If you are talking about the pardon that supposedly took place in 2015, then in my opinion it is an absolutely unauthorized interference by the executive power in the judicial power. Article 139 of the Constitution, which allows the president to exercise his prerogative to apply the law of pardon at any stage of continuing criminal proceedings. A pardon cannot be withdrawn in any way because there is no procedure. Despite these facts, the pardon was questioned and the court validly sentenced MPs Kamiński and Wąsik on the 20th of December. A day later, Speaker Hołownia decided to terminate the mandates of the former heads of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. What you have been doing in recent weeks is simply a scandal, and you bring disgrace to the lower house of Parliament. It wasn't long ago that you were crying over the Constitution, and today you are brazenly violating it. Constitution. Law and Justice politicians appealed against the Speaker's decision, and the Chamber of the Extraordinary Control on Public Affairs of the Supreme Court overturned Szymon Hołownia's decision. Then the Speaker of the Sejm illegally obtained another decision from the Chamber of Labour and Social Insurance. The same chamber of the Supreme Court stated that the decision of the Speaker of the Sejm was illegal, and the same chamber stated that the elections to the Sejm were legal, so there could be no such contradiction. Either they are MPs or the elections were illegal. So the Supreme Court clearly stated that the elections were legal, and the gentlemen are MPs. The chamber that is established and competent to resolve such a problem is only the Chamber of the Extraordinary Control of Public Affairs. The Chamber of Labour and Social Security does not have such competences. This results from the Act at the same time. Therefore, thanks to the pardon and the decision of the Supreme Court, Mariusz Kamiński and Maciej Wąsik still have parliamentary mandates. But Speaker Hołownia does not want to let them into the plenary hall and allow them to work as MPs. The gentlemen lose the right to be elected because this is stipulated in Article 99 of the Constitution, and in connection with the above, and Article 247 of the Electoral Code, their parliamentary mandate expires. There are no grounds to question the status of both MPs at all, and then, in my opinion, the position of the Supreme Court, which dealt with this matter before the second presidential pardon. Is Mariusz Kamiński a victim of torture that the authorities subjected him to while he was in prison? He was taken out of his cell, strapped to a bed, and then a half-metre-long plastic tube was inserted into his stomach. Kamiński announced a hunger strike, but the court chose the most drastic method of forced feeding and used this procedure on the very day the president pardoned the politician and he was to leave prison. Law and Justice President Jarosław Kaczyński talks about torture and gave assurances that justice will be served.
Karta Praw Podstawowych Unii Europejskiej.
The Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union states in Article 4 that no one shall be subjected to degrading treatment or punishment. What happened in the pre-trial detention centre in Radom, where Mariusz Kamiński was detained? Could there have been torture? I'm checking.
Do tego dojść w świetle prawa. Dzisiaj sprawdzam.
They tied me with belts on the bed. Then they tried to insert a feeding tube into my stomach through my nose. They were unable to do so despite repeated attempts. It was very, very painful. When it comes to the physical side, finally they inserted a half-metre-long plastic tube into my esophagus. These words touched many. The penitentiary court applied for and obtained consent to force-feed Mariusz Kamiński, who led the hunger protest. When information was already available that the Prosecutor General had submitted files with a request not to apply a pardon to Kamiński and Wąsik, the judge implemented the decision. On the same day, we asked the prison service about procedures in such matters. As the press spokesman replied, if the convict's life is in serious danger, as confirmed by at least 2 doctors, the necessary medical procedure, including surgery, may be performed even if the convict objects. The Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union prohibits torture and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. He was tortured. We will, of course, appeal to the appropriate institution of the European Union to accuse the Polish authorities of using torture. This decision was definitely made at the very top. I am convinced that this is Donald Tusk's personal decision. The Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union prohibits torture and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. They knew he would be released from prison soon, but they still forced to feed him. This is nonsense. The Ombudsman checked the conditions in which Mariusz Kamiński was held. He assured us that when he receives information about the hunger strike, he will analyze each such case.
Próbujemy przekonywać, że to nie jest.
We are trying to convince you that this is not a method by which you can achieve your goals. First of all, it weakens a body and poses a threat to life. Very often we have no influence on the people who make such decisions.
Osłabienia stanu zdrowia.
The Ombudsman, Professor Marcin Wiącek, also argued that the hunger protest is illegal. Therefore, some journalists asked about additional punishment for politicians imprisoned. What do you gentlemen think about the hunger strikes used by Mr. Kamiński and Mr. Wąsik? Can a normal prisoner go on a hunger strike, or are they subject to penalties? I was punished with a reprimand. TV and journalists are probably not satisfied that the reprimand is so mild. Executive Penal Code, Article 116A, indicates that prisoners have no right to refuse meals. The catalogue of disciplinary penalties is wide, from a reprimand through various restrictions regarding, for example, the inability to receive parcels in prison, or the inability to maintain contact with the outside world through limiting visits to close relatives or telephone calls. The most severe punishment is being placed in solitary confinement. In prisons in Radom and near Ostrolenka, the prison service treated us with respect. However, the first day spent in Grochów was difficult. I put up a very strong resistance. I said that you do not yet have regulations for political prisoners, and I am writing these regulations with my actions. I refuse to perform and obey such bandit rules of the game. As Kamiński emphasized, there was no need to use force feeding, not only because he was about to be released or due to medical complications, but because he had already agreed to be fed via a drip. The doctor was allegedly guided by political consideration. If there was such a comment by a doctor who decided to perform such an act, i.e. enteral nutrition, his comment referring to political beliefs is unacceptable. In addition to these repressions, there is a continuing campaign to take away our dignity. But there are things more important than money or health, and we will do it. When the usurpers wanted to take over the state media a month ago, it turned out they used forged documents. The district prosecutor in Warsaw has accused a notary who took part in the illegal takeover of public media of lying. In the documents, she recorded the dates and times of board meetings establishing the new authorities of the state media. Meanwhile, these meetings either did not take place or were held at a different time. The procedural activities carried out by prosecutors allowed them to establish that the notarial deed amending the management boards of the companies Polskie Radio, Telewizja Polska and Polska Agencja Prasowa is untrue as to the time and place of its conclusion. The procedural activities involving a search of the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage and the notarial office of Mrs. Joanna Kay, as well as the monitoring we secured, prove that this could not have happened at the place and time when these acts were to be concluded. Therefore, we decided that Joanna Kay should be charged for certifying untruths in the documents, changing the management boards of public media companies. Such a decision has been issued, but is not announced because the search is outside Poland. Turkey's parliament approved Sweden's NATO membership bid following more than 4 hours of debate, clearing a last major hurdle to expanding the Western military alliance after 20 months of delay. President Tayyip Erdogan's ruling AK party, its nationalist MHP allies, and the main opposition CHP voted in favour of the bid in the General Assembly, while opposition nationalist, Islamist and leftist parties voted against it. Result of the open vote on the proposed legislation regarding the approval of the protocol on the Kingdom of Sweden joining the North Atlantic Treaty. Number of votes 346, in favour 287, against 55, abstentions 4. Erdogan will sign the bill into law likely in the coming days, thus ending a lengthy process that has both frustrated some of Ankara's Western allies and enabled it to extract concessions. Hungary remains the only NATO member yet to ratify Stockholm's accession. The United States ambassador to Turkey said that after President Tayyip Erdogan gives a final sign-off on Sweden's NATO membership, it will trigger rapid steps towards US Congress endorsing a sale of F-16 fighter jets to Ankara.